In my most recent video, I showcased my Hawaiian ork surfers like this lad, which I'm going to be running as bikers. And I thought that it would be worth talking through how I actually made these, because these are by far the most complicated models I've ever put together in the hobby. So this video is going to be a pretty basic how-to, breaking down the different components of, well, how you can make yourself one of these, which you may want to do in the future, or you may just be nosy. Just to quickly answer the question of why, 40k takes itself way too seriously, and I thought I'd do something completely ridiculous. And I thought the funniest way to do that would be to contrast the most warlike stereotype in 40k with the most easygoing stereotype on Earth, the Hawaiian stereotype, which you could argue are both about enjoying yourself and being present in the moment. They just kind of go about it in very different ways. But also I just heard the phrase Hawaii 5 ork in my head and ran with it. So naturally, I had to make some surfers. So the models are basically made out of 3 components, which I'll break down in order: the surfers themselves, the boards that they are standing on, and then the water bases. The surfers themselves are actually the least interesting parts of the model, because they're basically just 40k boys from the boys kit. There are a couple of knob parts in there, and some of them have some Age of Sigmar parts or Age of Sigmar bodies from the Orc Warboys kit. But really, the only significant conversion work was just adding some lays with milliput, and on the other models adding things like sunglasses and flowers behind the ear. And then I painted them up pretty much the same as my other orc boys, which is to say using contrast paints, though I did do their skin volumetrically rather than using a contrast paint. And where I did use contrast, I tried to add an extra highlight like a dry brush over the bandages around the wrist. The boards, however, are much more interesting. I didn't make these myself. They were designed and 3D printed by my friend Cass Toledo, and she's done some other things for this army, like 3D printed pineapples and coconuts. So I can't take credit for the designs. Cass, you're wonderful. After being undercoated zenithally from a mid-grey to pretty much white, I hit the synthetic boards with Dela and Rowney ink, basically just picking 2 colors that I thought would contrast and go from one side of the board for one ink and from the other side of the board for the other ink, and they produced this beautiful gradient. I love using these inks through my airbrush. Whereas the wooden boards were basically, I think, Mournfang and then a wash and then dry brushed with, I think, Ungor flesh. The metal was just bolt gun metal hit with a null oil wash and then a dry brush of chainmail. And the golden bits of metal were exactly the same, but I then gave them a coat of, I think, snakebite leather contrast paint, which just dyes it really nicely. The gradients on the symbols on the boards were basically just painted with orange in the middle and then glazed up to sunburst yellow mixed in with a little bit of white. And then, I think crucially, the edges were highlighted with a mix of sunburst yellow and skull white just to make them pop. Now, however, we get onto the interesting bit, the bases, and this took some experimentation. The first step was undercoating the bases in Baharoth blue, which is the base rim color and like an accent color for the whole army, and then adding on top of that a pattern of light going through shallow water, so think like light going through a swimming pool. And this was achieved by painting on lines, almost like lightning, of the Baharoth blue mixed in with increasing amounts of skull white. I think I did about 3 layers of this, and the difference with lightning is that you have to make sure that the lines are sort of continuous and you don't have any just spontaneously appearing like you would in lightning. And then to add a bit of depth where it was furthest from a light streak, taking some Cantor blue and adding that to the Baharoth blue and basically just stippling that in to give a bit of a shadow. The main thing here, of course, is the water, which took some experimentation to get right, because I used resin and I didn't have very much experience using resin. The basic idea is that you take your base and then surround it with this stuff. This is acetate, which you may recognize as overhead projector material. A friend of mine swiped a few sheets of this from her office. Thank you. Crucially, resin doesn't stick to acetate, so you pour the resin in, let it set, and then when you peel the acetate off, the resin stays in its shape. Originally, I tried to do this using UV activated resin from Green Stuff World, so this is something that you pour in, and then you shine a UV torch on it, and it will set in a couple of seconds. But when I tried this, it basically came out looking like soap. I had loads of layers in it, loads of striations, loads of bubbles, and it just wasn't good enough. I had to bin that base. So instead, I switched out to Pebeo crystal resin, and I did another test with this, which failed because all of the resin just leaked out of the bottom of the base. It turned out that the seal at the bottom wasn't as watertight as I hoped it was. So I hit on a combination technique, which goes a bit like this. First of all, you attach the acetate to your base using small strips of sellotape, and at the bottom, go around with another loop of sellotape to try and seal it as best you can. Then pour in some of the UV resin around the seams and hit it with the UV torch to seal it. And it's important that you do this at the bottom, but also at the vertical seam where the acetate loops back around on itself. Note that whilst I did use dye in the rest of the resin, I didn't actually dye the UV resin for this step, and you cannot tell. With this step, you now have a watertight base, and you can move on to a proper resin pour. So for the Pebeo resin, it's a 2-part resin, so you add 2 parts of resin to 1 part hardener. I would highly recommend that you weigh the components, because if you get the ratio slightly wrong, it won't set right, it'll set a little bit tacky. Having mixed the resin together, I then added, I think, 3 drops of this blue ink from Green Stuff World, which was good across all of the bases. In fact, I could have probably done with a little bit less ink. You really don't need much. You then pour in the resin, checking for any leaks, which in my case happened once or twice, but fortunately, it's a completely reversible step, so you can literally just pour the resin out back into a container, plug any leaks, and then pour again, which I think I did twice. Then you just leave it for, it says on the packet, a day. I left it for several days in a dust-free environment, so you don't get any dust sticking to the surface or anything. So miniatures cabinet, if you have one, perfect. After this, you have the very nerve-wracking but very satisfying step of peeling off the acetate to reveal the water bases underneath. And then on top of that, I did a couple of extra details. So 2 of these surfers have these cresting waves, which were actually super easy to do. Basically, you take your sheet of acetate and bend it like this under the surfboard, so between the surfboard and the surface of the water, and then pour UV resin along the sort of the middle of it and let it drip down to the bottom so that you get a seal. Hit that with the UV torch so that it sets, and then repeat, but instead of letting it drip down, you then tilt the model so that the resin coats the cresting bit of the wave, if you like, and then tilt it backwards so that you get this really thin layer that you can hit with the UV torch and immediately set. And then the bit that I learned through trial and error was, in order to get this away safely, don't pull the acetate, you kind of pull one side, specifically the bottom, and then it will come away and, fingers crossed, leave the shape of the wave. This does leave quite a thin curved wave, so I added a bit more volume to it with some UV resin, but then on top of that added some more volume and some texture to the surface with this stuff, liquitex, which I think is technically a like a paint thickener, but it dries completely clear in a couple of hours, so it's perfect for water effects. I used it for the water on the Orc Boys bases, actually. On the surfer bases, I applied some using the handle of a brush and then tried to sculpt in some water-like shapes, so sort of some crevices and ravines on the run up to the crest of the wave in just a way that I thought would look natural. On some of the other bases, I also used this to create some smaller ripples, sort of surface waves, which would set, and I could then hit with a very light dry brush of white just to make it stand out a little bit more. And then the last step in the water effects was to get the bubbles where the waves are breaking, and that is achieved by these. These are tiny little glass beads that you're supposed to use in nail art. I think I got these from eBay, and basically just attach them using PVA glue. I tried using super glue on one model, but that actually made the beads go really cloudy, so I'd recommend using PVA. And that's how I did the water effects. Oh, I suppose the other thing in the bases is the fish. These were a pack from Green Stuff World that I painted up and attached to the base before I did the resin pour using tiny little bits of plastic from a blister pack. And I was worried that this would react poorly with the resin, but I don't think it did. You cannot see them at all. And there you go. That's how you make a squad of orc bikers that will get shot off the board turn 1. It took me a couple of months on and off to kind of get these to where I was happy with them, especially the resin bases, which was just quite intimidating. But now I know how to do it, I'm going to do a couple more of these in the future, and I look forward to trying to do this on a bigger scale for my war boss on Deathkiller Wartrike, which is going to be a war boss on a Moana-style outrigger canoe. Cannot wait to do that. I hope that this video was useful, or at the very least interesting, and if you did enjoy it, please do pop it a like, share it with your hobby friends who you think might also find it interesting, and if you want to see more videos like this, then I'm going to be hopefully doing more regular painting content in 2022. But that just leaves me to say happy hobbying, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.